One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Beautiful, just beautiful.
As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, NASA is taking the next giant leap with a return to the moon. The Apollo missions lifted astronauts from the Cape atop a Saturn V rocket. No earlier than 2024, American astronauts will return to the moon using the Space Launch System, or SLS rocket. The mission is called Artemis. In Greek mythology, Artemis was the twin sister of Apollo. Much of the infrastructure originally created for the Apollo missions will be used by Artemis, including the Vehicle Assembly Building, the Crawler Transporter, Launchpad 39B, and the Control Room. Take a look back with us as NASA looks forward to taking the next giant leap. Hi, it's Rick. We're inside the Vehicle Assembly Building at the Kennedy Space Center. At one time, this was the largest building in the world in terms of inside volume. And even now, the ceiling is over 500 feet above us. This was used to stack the various stages of the Saturn V rocket. Now it's being retrofitted for the Space Launch System. The various components of the Space Launch System will be brought in here. They'll be placed one atop the other and then transported out to the launch pad.
We'll be bringing our solid rocket boosters in. We'll stack those. Actually, the boosters will be bigger. In Shuttle, they were 4-segment boosters, and for SLS, we're using 5-segment boosters. In Shuttle, we literally took the launch tower off of the Apollo mobile launcher and put it permanently out at the pad, called a fixed service structure. But for the SLS program, we're going back to what we had in Apollo as far as a mobile launch platform. It'll not only be the platform, but will be the tower itself will be integrated is integrated as part of the platform.
I did witness the very first V2 rocket going off on Cape Canaveral here, and July 24th of 1950, about 9:30 in the morning. I was wading in the river with my cast net, trying to get some mullet, what we call mullet for bait, live mullet, and I saw this phenomenon. It was summer, just out of school. You always couldn't wait to get out of school, get your shoes off and go barefoot. And I hear this crackling sound emanating from north of me, and I look down there that way, and I see this contrail leaving out of the Cape there with this crackling noise, and it was really weird, and I was astounded by what it was. I asked my dad that night when he came home from work. I said, "Do you know anything that went on or anything?" And no, he didn't know anything about it. But the very next day in the Cocoa Tribune, it had this picture, this V2 rocket taking off out of here. But growing up here, and then eventually morphing or phasing into the Saturn program, because I was with a company that just happened to win a contract on one of the stages, which was Douglas, which became McDonnell Douglas, that got the contract for the third stage. And it was just, I was living the dream and didn't know it at the time, but it was just kind of chronologically happening, and it was just the most exciting thing that could ever happen to me.
One piece of equipment at Kennedy Space Center that survived over 50 years is the Crawler Transporter. These are the Crawler Transporters that were used to transport the Saturn V rocket from the Vehicle Assembly Building about 3 miles down to Pad 39A. They moved at 1 mile per hour.
The Crawler is a combination of train technology, mining equipment technology, and it's kind of packaged up like a ship. We kind of joke and call this the original Prius, because it is kind of a hybrid vehicle. We use diesel engines that are hooked to a generator, and then those generators they create DC current. That DC current gets supplied to 16 of these traction motors. There's 2 on each tread belt, and that's what turns our tread belts. And we run on the original Alco engines, which stood for American Locomotive Company, V16 engines, and they are 2,750 horsepower.
What's it like to actually drive a Crawler Transporter?
Oh, it's a great honor, actually. It's what I kind of call the gravy part of the job. I mean, we do all we can to take care of it, but when we get to operate it, it's probably one of the greatest things you could do.
This is Pad 39B, dates back to the Apollo era. The crawler transporter would bring the Saturn rockets up here. They'd be locked into that mechanism you see behind me and lift off. It was also used for the space shuttle.
I was an electrical engineer, and I worked for NASA in the design engineering department. It was a Saturn V in 1969. That was my first Saturn V close-hand view, and when that ship took off, the shirt just bounced on you like this. The windows in everybody's home rattled. It set off automobile car alarms. It was exciting.
It's now being renovated for the Space Launch System that will carry the Orion capsule into orbit and finally to the moon. Behind me is a piece of history that's being remade. This is the firing room at Kennedy Space Center that was used in the Apollo missions and is now being reconfigured for the Space Launch System and Artemis.
This room was built to launch the Apollo mission. So Apollo 4 was the first Apollo mission launched from this building and from this room. And eventually Apollo 11 was launched out of this room as well. Great thing about this room is the history is very, very deep, and a lot of firsts have happened here. I mentioned those first two. The first space shuttle mission was launched out of here, STS-1. And as we move forward, the Artemis missions will be launched out of this room. The room may look different, but the teamwork, the way we approach launch countdown, none of that has changed, and that will carry forward as we move into the Artemis missions. For Artemis 1, in this control room, there'll be just under 100 folks. In comparison to what you see here from an Apollo perspective, there is approximately 400 people in this room. And as you can kind of expect, technology plays a huge role in that, and the capabilities. I mean, when you look at a lot of the capabilities in this room, they're very analog, very specific measurements on specific readouts, whereas everything we have is multiple displays, able to bring up different views of different systems across multiple monitors. But ultimately, the teams and the way the teams operate are very similar, and we've learned a lot of lessons through the years that we carry forward today that I think if you had somebody that was on this launch team come and watch our team go through a sim, they would feel right at home.
I'm Rick Glasby at the Kennedy Space Center for WFIT.